Okay, we're going to talk about independent and dependent variables. So, obviously, I'm not here right now, so that's why you're watching a video of the notes. So, I'm going to go over this. It's important that you write down everything that I do, um, and we'll kind of go from there. So, we're going to talk about the first part of this, and then we'll talk about what independent variables are and dependent variables, and then we'll do some practice problems towards the bottom. But we're going to start with this. So there's really not math involved with this. It's kind of more situational stuff. Um, but there will be math tied into this eventually. So if we look about the think about it up here, so does the amount of gas in a car depend on how many miles have been driven, or do the number of miles depend on the amount of gas in the car? So this would be the amount of gas depends on the miles. So the amount of gas depends on the miles driven. So the more miles that are driven, the less gas you're going to have. So number two, do the number of people going to the movies depend on the cost, or does the cost of going to the movies depend on the number of people going? So the cost is going to depend on the number of people. So obviously, the more people that go, the more expensive it is going to be. So, okay, so dependent, that means to depend on something else. So if you are dependent on something, you rely on it. So to depend on So when we think about independent and dependent variables, this is going to be the value that relies on something or depends on it. So the value that depends on So independent, to not depend on something else. So you are not depending, so these are opposites. So independent, you do not depend on something else. So this value can stand alone. So pretty much dependent value, this is what relies or depends on another value, and in this case it's going to depend on the independent variable. The independent variable is the value that does not depend on anything, and this value can stand alone. So here are some situations with this. So the value of a car and the age of a car. So the age of the car would be the independent variable. And the dependent variable would be the value of the car. So as the car gets older and older, and as it's been used more, the value of that is going to decrease, or the value of it is going to be not as good because it gets used over and over and over again. So the age of the car doesn't rely on anything, it just gets older, where the value of the car depends on the age, because the more you use the car, the more it's going to break apart and stuff like that. Okay, the time it takes to run a mile and the speed of a runner. So the independent variable would be the speed of the runner, and the dependent variable would be the time. So I'm just going to put time for that. So the time is going to depend on how fast that the runner is going to finish the race. So the faster they go, the quicker the time would be. The slower they go, the longer the time's going to be. So the time would depend on how fast the runner goes. Okay. The amount of water a plant receives and the length of the life of the plant. Why don't you pause the video, try this one on your own, and then I'm going to go over it once you unpause it. Okay, so the amount of the water would be the independent variable, and the lifespan or the length of life would be the dependent variable. So the lifespan or the length of the life is going to depend on the amount of water that the plant will receive. So if it gets a little bit of water, it's probably not going to last as long. If it gets a large amount of water, then it will probably have a longer life or length of life. So the lifespan depends on the amount of water that it receives. Okay, same thing. Why don't you go ahead and pause the video, try this one on your own, and then see what you get after you unpause it. Okay, the temperature of the water and the depth at which the temperature was measured. So the depth would be the independent variable, and the temperature of the water would be the dependent variable. So the depth, that's how deep something is. So the temperature would change depending on how deep it was measured at.